Well, good morning, everybody, and Merry Christmas. I know. It is still Christmas today. Today is actually the last day in the season of Christmas. This is the 12th day of Christmas, or if you want to use the fancy name, this is 12th night. And today is the day that our celebration of the Christmas season concludes. So when you come to church next week, all the decorations are going to be put away, and we're going to return to our normal expositional study in the book of 2 Samuel. But before we leave Christmas, today, I hope to show you how it's important for us to understand that our celebration of Christmas, the celebration of our Savior coming, should never stop. And even when it's not the Christmas season anymore, the message of Christmas should still be in our hearts and should still be on our lips. Now, today's the last day of Christmas for us, but tomorrow is actually the day that the Eastern Church celebrates Christmas Day. So you can tell people Merry Christmas tomorrow, too. For us, tomorrow is what we call Epiphany, which is the day when we commemorate and celebrate the visit of the Magi to Mary and Joseph and Jesus. And because we have church today and not tomorrow, today we're going to focus on the coming of the Magi. And it's actually really important. The Magi are an extremely important part of the Christmas story, especially for you and me. And that's another thing I hope to show you today. So, we're going to conclude our celebration of Christmas by looking at the Magi. Now, it is the inclusion of the Magi in the story is no small detail, and it is no accident. But who were those guys? And why are they important to us? Well, to answer that question, we're going to begin in Matthew chapter 2. So you can join me there, Matthew chapter 2, that tells us the story of the Magi. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, 'Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose in the east and have come to worship him.'" Now, bad news. I have to begin our discussion about the Magi by addressing a few misconceptions, misunderstandings that we usually have about them. And I actually think that I am particularly qualified to discuss this because here at Cornerstone, the Breakfast with the Wise Men is one of the biggest and longest running Christmas kids events that we do. And you may not know this at this point, but I was actually one of the original wise guys. In fact, I was one of the wise men so long ago that when I began being a wise man at the Breakfast with the Wise Men, we didn't even have costumes. And on the morning we came for Breakfast with the Wise Men, the directive that was given to us was to go down to the storage room and find a costume. And that's what we did. The three of us went down, and Paul can tell you, he can confirm this to you. We went down to the storage room, and we made up our wise men costumes that morning. And we emerged from the storage room wrapped in fancy-looking tablecloths or old Christmas tree skirts, whatever we could find to be the wise men. And I am actually an old enough wise man at this point that a baby who I held at Breakfast with the Wise Men and who threw up on me has now gone off and is about to graduate college. Yikes. But I'm not one of the wise guys anymore. And I don't know what I'm supposed to conclude from that. Maybe I've lost wisdom as I've gotten older. But let's talk about that song that the wise men sing at our Breakfast with the Wise Men, that famous song that we think of, that comes to mind when we think about the Magi, the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are." And we're going to stop right there and don't go any further than that. Ready for this? We don't know that there were three. The Bible never says there were three Magi. It says they brought three gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And from those three gifts, that's where we get the idea that there were three wise men. But the Bible never says three. But After that, of course, tradition has taken over. And we now know, because church tradition has given us this, we know their names. Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthasar. That probably didn't come about until about 500 years after Jesus. And today, you can go to the cathedral in Cologne, Germany, and supposedly you can visit their skulls. And by the way, if you come to Breakfast with the Wise Men, you will see that we do use those traditional church names for the wise men. And that is only because Wise Man 1, Wise Man 2, and 3 sounds like some kind of Dr. Seuss story. But the Bible doesn't say their names. It doesn't tell us how many there were. They may have come with a large entourage. We do know that there was more than one who came because the word magus is the singular word. It's not used. It's the plural word, the word magi. So there was more than one. And the Bible never says they were kings. The term magi means that they were scholars or students, probably of a vast variety of sciences. They were probably well learned in all types of science, but they probably had a particular focus on astronomy, which at that point dealt with how things move throughout the night sky. And we know that because astronomers, they would notice when a star appeared, and that is how they enter the story, the appearance of a star. The term wise men tries to capture that scholar-student nature in their identity. But the Bible never says they were kings. The Bible does say they came from the east, but it doesn't necessarily tell us that they came from somewhere so far away as the Orient. The idea that they were from China comes about almost 1,000 years after Jesus from a story that happened then. And today, answers about who the wise men were range from they were scholars from Persia to Chinese mystics to Nabateans from Petra and Jordan. One popular explanation that I think is really compelling is that the Magi may have descended from the school of wise men that Daniel started when he was in exile in Babylon, because Daniel too is referred to as a Magi. And these Magi that come to see Jesus may actually have been looking for a star at that time to announce the birth of the Messiah, because Daniel predicts the timing of the coming of the Messiah, so they might have been expecting it because of that. So the Bible doesn't tell us who they are, but why do we sing every Christmas year, "We three kings of Orient are," when I told you that every detail in that sentence may not be right? Well, mostly we sing that because we two or more smart guys of the East doesn't fit in the song. But I got to ruin it more for you. Because if you keep reading in Matthew chapter 2, later on you'll find the story of when the Magi actually find Jesus. And when the Magi find Jesus, it says they came to the house, not stable, not barn, not cave, where Jesus was. And it says they find in Greek, toddler, not infant, Jesus. So to mess up all of your nativity displays, the wise men did not visit Jesus on the night of his birth. They came months or potentially even more than a year later, and their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, expensive gifts, were probably what funded the Holy Family's flight into Egypt to get away from King Herod. And as an aside, that verse that I had up on the screen before, Matthew chapter 2, verse 2, contains one of my favorite scholars trying to fix the Bible but failing examples. Because when the wise men came, they say, "We saw his star," and the NIV now says, "when it rose," and the traditional reading there says, "in the east." And there is this big discussion about how the phrase "in the east," when it's talking about a star or sun, can mean when it rose, because the sun rises in the east. And really, peoples at this time didn't have words like east or west. If they were going to go east, they would say, "I'm going toward the rising." And if they were going to go west, they would say, "I'm going towards the setting." So really, all these words mean the same thing. So you could say "in the east," or you can say "when it rose." And this comes up because there's this problem that the scholars thought they had. If the wise men are in the east, they're from the east, and they see a star, like they say, in the east, and they follow that star, that takes them west in the wrong direction. We have a problem here in the Bible. So the scholars, the translators, tried to fix the problem. They said, no, it's not supposed to say in the east, it's supposed to say when it rose. So they didn't follow a star to the east, they followed the star when it rose. But if you're a genius, you can figure out that that doesn't help the issue. If you interchange in the east and when it rose, when talking about stars, it doesn't help. Because if the wise men are from the east, and they see a star when it rises, which would be in the east, because the sun, the moon, the stars all rise in the east and set in the west, hence the reason for interchanging in the east and when it rose. If they follow that star, they're still going the wrong way. Okay, the solution to the problem, I think, is actually far simpler than that. When the wise men say, we saw his star in the east, they're not talking about where they saw the star in the sky. They were talking about where they were when they saw the star. They were in the east. Now, we have a lot of misconceptions about the wise men, don't we? But what we do know is that they came from somewhere in the east. They weren't Jewish. And they came to honor Jesus because they had seen a star. And there are lots of explanations about what this star that they have seen might have been. And some people say it was a supernova, a star blowing up. Some people say it was a comet, or that two planets in the sky came together and looked like a brighter star, or that two planets in the sky came together in a certain constellation and looked like something else. Or God just did something supernatural in the sky at this point to announce Jesus' birth to the world. And you can check this out for yourself and spend all kinds of time if you want. If you want to, there's a good video called The Star of Bethlehem. It's by a lawyer who tracks back how stars move, and he has an explanation of what he thinks the star is. There's also a good video called His Star by Jason Lyle. He has a different explanation. You can get deep into that. The point is, there was a star in the sky, and the star was fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Because if you turn all the way back to Numbers, quite against what he wanted to say, Balaam was forced by God to prophesy this. A star will come from Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel. That's Numbers 24:17. And that is a prophecy that is commonly regarded by Jewish scholars then and today as a prediction about the Messiah. And the star that the wise men saw was a fulfillment of that prophecy. However, the star wasn't seen by Jewish scholars. In fact, as far as we know, it wasn't seen by the Jews at all, because they weren't looking. If they had been looking, they would have seen what the Magi saw. If you can see a star from China or from Persia that's over Israel, you can see it in Israel. If they had looked, they would have seen. Anyone could have seen it. The fulfillment of the prophecy in Numbers, the proclamation of the birth of the Messiah in the sky. God put the star in the sky because the Messiah wasn't just for the Jewish people. He announced it to all the world by putting a star in the sky for anybody who was looking to see, to tell the whole world. And for those who were looking, the sky declared the birth of the Messiah. It declared the glory of God, and that's exactly what we just heard read to us in Psalm 19. If you look at Psalm 19, verse 1, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." The psalmist shouted what was later echoed by the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans. The creation declares the glory of the Creator. Everywhere we look, particularly when we look at the sky, look at the heavens, we see the glory of God because the heavens are shouting it at us. The skies proclaim his glory, that they were made by him. If you look at the heavens, you see it clearly that they were made by God. Does everybody see it? Many deny it, but not everybody saw that star either. even though it was there for everybody to see. Verse 2 says, day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. And here, your English translation just does not do justice to the original language, because the Hebrew here is overly strong. It's not that the heavens and the sky speak God's glory. In the Hebrew, they gush words. They spurt out knowledge. They overflow with the message of God's glory. Now, this is something that we fail to appreciate. All creation declares the glory of God, whether it's daytime or nighttime. We don't appreciate that today in our modern world. The pouring forth knowledge, the declaration of God's glory from the heavens. However, it was extremely important for cultures all throughout history before ours. Did you know the sky teaches you stuff? The sky gives you knowledge. The sky can tell you the time of the year. It can tell you the season. It can even give you directions. If you know what you're doing, you can tell where you're going by the information that pours forth from the sky to you. And even in our modern knowledge, most of what we know about light and many other things come from knowledge that we have gathered as it pours out of the sky to us. When was the last time that you looked up at the night sky? Really looked? I know, we never do that. We have our phones and our TVs, and that's far more interesting than the night sky. But you see, I'm a nerd. And I'm not sure when or why I gained this knowledge, or whether you taught it to me, or whether somebody taught it to me, or whether, like most things, I taught myself. But I am a person who can guide you through the night sky. I can show you the constellations, and I can name the stars for you. I can show you the planets, and I can tell you why they're called planets. I don't use my telescope nearly as much as I'd like to. I'd love to get a bigger one, but I just don't have the time to use it. But a little while ago, a couple years ago, Jupiter came really close to the Earth, and I tracked Jupiter through the night sky with my telescope, and this is not a picture from my telescope. This is from a much bigger, fancier telescope. Actually, it's the biggest, fanciest telescope. But I, with my little telescope, tracked Jupiter through the sky, and it was really cool because Jupiter wasn't fully illuminated by the sun. It was only like 3/4 illuminated, so the red spot, the giant storm that's on Jupiter, was only half lit up, and it was really neat, and I followed it across the sky. We don't spend time considering the heavens. People before us did, and the heavens declared the truth. God is glorious. He's immensely powerful. Look at what he made. And when you look up at the sky at night, it's not blank. Somebody put stuff there. God is here, the sky tells us. God hung the stars in space and made their light shine here. And it's by looking at what God made that we learn everything that we know about our universe. God made the earth perfect for life, and he also made it the perfect place to look at and learn about the universe, because by learning about our universe, we learn about him. And throughout history, almost every branch of science was considered a religious pursuit, seeking to learn about the Creator by learning about the creation. And today, we continue to develop more and more technology that lets us look further into space and further out with more and more precision. And guess what happens? The more we look, the more the heavens pour forth speech of the glory of God. So we can look up and we can see our closest neighbor that's about the size of the United States. It reflects this cool, cold light. There's nothing there. It's beautiful in its desolation. And even though it's desolate at the moon is necessary for life here on our planet because it protects us. It stabilizes our planet. It regulates the tides and the weather. Without the moon, we wouldn't be here. We can continue to look and we see another wanderer, another planet, 9 times as wide as the Earth. You can put 9 Earths across the center of that planet, not counting the stuff that sticks out, which is trillions and trillions of tiny little moonlets made of dust and rock and ice that look like rings around the planet because there's so many of them. And by the way, if you want to look at the night sky, if you get a good pair of binoculars, you can see Saturn's rings with a good pair of binoculars. We live 93 million miles from a stable hydrogen explosion that is 100 times as wide as the Earth. You put 100 Earths across the center of the sun. And it releases more energy in 1 second than 1 billion major cities use in a year. God has unlimited power, the universe declares to us. And those are just our closest neighbors, ones that the ancients knew about and looked at. And we can look further. And when we look further, we see other stars, some like our sun, some bigger, some smaller, some different in color and different in light, and some massive beyond understanding, like Antares, which is 600 times as wide as the sun. You can fit 600 of our suns across the center of it, and if you can fit 600 of our suns across it, and you can fit 100 Earths across our sun, I'll let you do the math to figure out how big it is compared to the Earth. It is huge beyond imagining. But not only that, we can look and we see stars that dance around each other in pairs and triplets. We see clusters of stars that are just packed together, more than we can count even. And as we develop technology further and further, we looked at what we thought was blurry stars. And it turned out that blurry stars, the cloudy stars, are actually massive groups of stars organized together in structures called galaxies with hundreds of billions of stars in each of them. And we can look into space and we see galaxies actually in the process of colliding with each other. Two galaxies running into each other. Is that a problem for you in your creation model? No. It's a big problem for the Big Bang Theory. And in fact, the interesting thing is that these two galaxies that are in the midst of colliding right now, none of the stars in them will hit each other because the spaces between the stars are so immense that the galaxies will just pass through each other. But we'll never get to see that because it's going to take too long to do that. We see galaxies that are unimaginably far away. This is a picture from the Hubble telescope that we thought was a black spot, a blank spot in the sky. We couldn't see any stars there. And when we looked at it with a bigger telescope, what we saw is more stars than we can count. Actually, each of those little dots on the screen is not a star, but our galaxies. Hundreds of billions of stars. So far away, and we didn't even know we were there until we built a big enough telescope to see them. God put it there, knowing that we would find it and that we would hear the speech from those stars now. Imagine the millennia that those galaxies existed, declaring God's glory before we even knew they were there. And all the glory, this is my favorite part, all the glory that is declared by the heavens, everything I just told you about and more in the creation story is told in this sentence. And he created the stars. It's God's sense of humor. Imagine the power that it takes to create all of that and more. And to God, that amount of power is half a sentence. This is what the creation declares about God, his power and his divine nature. The German theologian August Tholuck said, "Though all preachers on earth should grow silent and every human mouth cease from publishing the glory of God, the heavens above will never cease to declare and proclaim his majesty and glory. They are forever preaching, for like an unbroken chain, their message is delivered from day to day and from night to night." God is extravagant in the beauty that he hung in the sky that is above our heads all the time if we would just look, that it is there shouting, declaring God's glory to us. The psalmist said in verse 3, "They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out to all the earth, their words to the end of the world." They don't use literal words, but they declare God's glory. They make no sound, but they declare the work of his hands. And again, as technology has advanced, the stars don't make sound, but some of them do send a radio signal out as well. And if we focus a radio telescope on them, we can interpret that radio signal into sound so that we now know that some of the stars actually can make sound with the right technology. And in a minute or two, we're going to play a recording that's made from those radio telescopes, and we're going to sing along with the stars that are on the screen behind me. The more we develop technology, and the more we observe the universe with that, what we see more and more is the glory of God revealed in ways we never knew existed before. Like the message God sent, extending the message of the birth of the Messiah to all the world in the sky even to the Magi. In the same way, creation declares God's glory everywhere. There is no place where the glory of God is not proclaimed from creation. The Apostle Paul said this in Romans chapter 1. He said in verse 18, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For, that means because, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made." So the people are without excuse. Or in the Greek, the people are unapologetos. They are without a reasoned defense for rejecting God, because when you look at the creation, when you look at what he has made, his attributes, his power, and his divine nature, his wisdom are clear. Because the heavens declare the glory of God. They gush forth. They shout it to everyone who has eyes to look. Spurgeon quoted Aristotle as saying this. Aristotle, by the way, is not a Christian, but he said, "Should a man live underground and there converse with the works of art and mechanism, and should afterwards be brought up into the open day and see the several glories of the heaven and earth, he would immediately pronounce them works of such a being as we define God to be." They are without excuse, because when you look at the creation, it is clear, even to those who don't believe, it is clear that God exists, and he is powerful, and he is divine, and he is wise. The psalmist said, "In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. It's like a bridegroom coming out of its chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises from one in the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is deprived of its warmth." And I love this description from the psalmist of the sun, because so many other cultures throughout time have worshiped the sun, but the psalmist does not compare the sun to a god or something like that. He compares the sun to a groom arriving joyfully at the wedding party that God threw for it. That's what happens every time the sun comes up. It's happy to be at the party. He compares it to an athlete running its course. And I love this description because some of you know that when I've done my stupid, crazy, super long race in Vermont the last 2 years, I learned that my start time was exactly at sunrise. And I knew if I tried really, really hard, I might be able to finish the 30-mile plus race up and down the mountain before the sun set, before it finished its race across the side. So my goal, the whole time I was training, was to beat the sun to the finish line as it raced its race across the sky. And I like the description of that. The point the psalmist is making is that the sun covers everywhere and everyone. Even if a person had no eyes and was blind, they would still know the sun was there because they could feel its warmth. The stars by night and the sun by day shout the glory of God. There is no place where the glory of God is not seen. Just like for those looking some 2,000 years ago, the birth of the Messiah was announced. If they were looking, they saw it. And we know the Magi saw it. They saw the star, and they followed it. Did other people see that star? Did other people see that star and understand what it meant, but they were too far away to make the journey? We don't know. Was there a celebration of the birth of the Messiah somewhere else in the world? We don't know. How many people saw that star, the announcement of the birth of the Messiah, but you went, it's just a star? We don't know. How many people had become so jaded with the constant shouting of the glory of God all the time from the heavens that they stopped paying attention to it, and they never even saw the star? Again, we don't know. But who was told about the birth of Emmanuel? Who was told about God with us, our Savior? Who was told? Well, that's the beauty of the Christmas story. And it's why the Magi are so important for us. You see, the Christmas story begins with two devoted Jews, the chosen people of God, not the ones you're thinking of. It begins with Zechariah and Elizabeth, the parents of John the Baptist. And Zechariah and Elizabeth were part of the priestly line. Zechariah was serving in the temple. The Bible tells us that they were upright and blameless. They are the kind of people who we'd expect God to tell about the birth of the Messiah. And that's important for us because it means that God doesn't leave out the religious people. He doesn't leave out those who seek him. And what happens next in the Christmas story is the Christmas story moves on to Mary and Joseph, who I know we revere today, and some people too much. We revere them today, but when they were brought into the Christmas story and included in it, he was just a carpenter from some nowhere town that isn't even on a map we have until 200 years later. And she was just a girl who was willing to be used by God. The point is, they were definitely not what we would choose as the parents of the Savior of the world. But God chooses who God chooses. And his reasons may not make sense to us, but he chooses who he chooses. And that's important for us because God has chosen each and every one of us. And even if we don't agree with his choice or it doesn't make sense to us, he knows better, and God chooses who he chooses. And then the Christmas story spreads to the shepherds. And God sends this massive choir army of angels to blast the message to the unsuspecting shepherds. And the shepherds, they were Jews, they were God's people, but their lifestyle and their job meant that they couldn't keep the rules of their religion. So they were dirty in a religion where ritual cleaning was required. They touched things on a daily basis that you were not allowed to touch in their religion. So they were considered unworthy. But to the unworthy and the dirty, God sent a massive angel choir army to deafen them with the message of God's love, the message of God's favor to the world in the birth of the Messiah. And that's important too, because the message of Jesus and God's love is even for the dirty and outcast in our society, the religiously unacceptable. It is for everyone. The Christmas story tells us that. And then we come to the Magi. And the Magi, they didn't fall asleep and have a vision that let them know about the birth of Jesus. They definitely weren't visited by a choir army of angels. They weren't even visited by a single angel. They looked up and they saw a star. And they heard the message of God that was being declared from the heavens, the message of God's glory. And they followed the message of God's glory, and they found the message of God's love. But the message that they looked up and saw wasn't only addressed to them. It was in the sky for everybody to see. Anyone could have looked up and showed up at the house. The message of the Christmas story, the message of God's love to redeem lost sinners, to bring us back to him, starts by telling individuals, starts by telling a group, and then the message is proclaimed to the whole world in the Magi. And that's important for us, because it is when the Magi are included in the Christmas story that the story is extended to us. Because we, like the wise men, are not Jewish. And why would the Jewish Messiah be for anyone but the Jews? Why would the Jewish Messiah be for anybody but the Jews? Well, it makes perfect sense if you've been listening to what God has been saying from the very beginning. That's the message that God has been telling from the beginning. It was declared to Abraham that through his offspring, all nations, that's everybody, would be blessed. And that blessing is the eternal life that is found through faith in Jesus. The same message was announced to the prophet Isaiah. The people walking in darkness, not Jews, have found a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, the Father of Eternity, the Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. A shoot will come up from the root of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of Yahweh will rest on him, and the earth will be full. The earth will be full of the knowledge of Yahweh as water covers the sea. It's been in the story throughout the beginning, if you were listening, and it was announced in the sky to all the earth by the star. The star was in the sky to call all those who would come to the Messiah to come. John explained this at the beginning of his gospel. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The star in the sky is the confirmation that everyone can find salvation in Jesus. There is no people who are left out. God made a way where there was no way. He fixed what we broke. He ended the war that we started between us and him. He made a way for us to come back to him, and he extends that to all who would believe. The Magi are in the Christmas story for us. They are important to us, the non-Jews, the wild olive shoot that's grafted into the main tree. They are the evidence. The Magi are the evidence that the story of Jesus is for us, for the whole world. And they are a reminder to us, a challenge to us to never stop seeking God, never stop looking, never stop listening for God's glory to be revealed, because it shouted from all creation all the time. And it was shouted to all the earth at Jesus' birth, but the Magi were the only ones who followed. So we must look and listen for God's glory all the time, because it is being told from what has been made. Maybe, just maybe, you should turn off the phone and contemplate God's glory in the night sky tonight. And the Magi are important because they remind us of Jesus' command to us. The star was in the sky because we're supposed to spread God's love to all. We're to tell them about the salvation found in Jesus. We're to tell them of God's love for them, the story of God's love for them. It began before the creation of the world, when God in his wisdom fixed what we hadn't broken yet, but we're going to break. God himself came to earth as Emmanuel, as God with us, as a baby in a manger. The story shouts God's love and justice from the real Christmas tree, the cross. And the story is victorious 3 days later in an empty tomb. As we are going, we must make disciples. Tell them of God's love for lost sinners like me. The heavens still declare the glory of God, and the skies still declare the work of his hand to this day. Because the star was in the sky, we also have the purpose, like the star, of spreading the message of God's love and God's glory to all those he puts around us. It is our job to declare God's glory along with the creation, because we are part of his creation that declares his glory. And because of that, even though tomorrow the season on the calendar may be over, Christmas should never be over for us.